Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Doomer Optimism podcast. Speaking as your co-host today is Twitter anon Anarcho Contrarian, or AC for short, for the sake of this conversation. That's less of a mouthful. And today I'm joined by first-time co-host Kara Marshall. So Kara, since you're relatively new to the audience, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself quick before we introduce our guest today?
Sure. I work in the energy efficiency program industry. Recently, relevant to this discussion, I recently moved back to my home state of Connecticut after living for several years in Boston. My husband and I have a few acres of land and an old house, and we're really looking to return the land to ecological and, perhaps a small scale agricultural productivity, and have a long-standing interest in issues of sustainability and environmental stewardship.
Great. Thanks, Kara. So today we have the tremendous pleasure of chatting with a man who we both have followed and admired for quite some time. And as we said in the sort of off-recording intro, we're both dues-paying members of Strong Towns. So we are very much, as you'll come to find, Chuck here, interested in local autonomy, local power and action. But today our guest is author, founder and president of Strong Towns, Mr. Chuck Marohn. So Chuck, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. This will be a lot of fun.
Yeah, great. I'm really looking forward to it. So many people in the Doomer Optimism circle, which really is a circle that started on Twitter, frankly, really in light of COVID. Believe it or not, but we're very familiar with you in general. But for those who aren't, we'd love to have maybe a 30,000-foot view of you, your work at Strong Towns, and personally, if you could touch on, I'm personally interested in the why. Why did you start Strong Towns? So if you could give us a high-level intro, that would be great.
Yeah, well, that's the why question is an interesting one in the sense that both of your background, I have similar sense of where I came from and what I'm about. I grew up on a small farm in central Minnesota, and I went to the University of Minnesota and got an engineering degree. And I came back to my hometown, and I was part of the machine building all of the new stuff. I was part of the machine that built the new Walmart and built the new Home Depot and put in all the frontage roads on the highways. And I was working for all these cities doing engineering work. When it started to occur to me that a lot of what I was doing, from my vantage point, didn't make a lot of sense. I went back to school and I got a planning degree. And my theory at the time was, if I get a planning degree, planners are kind of upstream of engineers. Engineers are the downstream, problem solvers. If I can get a planning degree, certainly the planners are the ones who upstream are making these mistakes, and I can be part of that solution and help do a better job. And I found out that planners were not actually upstream. They were right in the morass with everybody else. As I delved into that more and more, I ran my own planning firm for about a decade, and I started to recognize that nobody was really upstream. The money flowing in and the projects we were doing and the stuff we were investing our time and energy and resources in was really, not only not well thought out and well directed, but it actually kind of responded to base human instincts of, we can get this project, let's do it. And it was never a lot greater thought than that. And so in 2008, when the housing crisis was at its peak and the things were crashing down around us, and I think the doomer optimist part of me was more tilted towards the doomer at that time. This is what I've been telling everybody was going to happen. I started to write this blog, and I started to write it because I wondered if I was crazy. I said a few years after that, and it's been a while since I've said this, but there was a point in time in 2008 where I said, either I'm crazy or the world's crazy, and I'm going to be open to either outcome. But I'm going to explain and enunciate why I think this is going on. And I started to share that with my friends and my colleagues. And as in this kind of connected world, communities grow up very quickly around ideas. And pretty soon I found myself getting invited to speak in different places and being asked to write for different things, and people were sharing our stuff. And pretty soon this tiny group of, a handful of people having this conversation is hundreds and then thousands and now ultimately millions of people, interested in how do we build cities that are bottom up, financially strong, resilient, and going to survive no matter what happens.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, as I briefly explained in my elevator pitch to you, when I approached you for this interview, the Doomer aspect of Doomer Optimism is really sort of a collective belief that we have that, something is wrong. Our systems, our modern systems are failing us at least, be they our social systems, economic, environmental, civic, what have you. But the optimism comes from the belief that, with these failures will come, many positive changes, specifically, towards a more human scaled alternative.
I was having this conversation last night with my daughter, and she is my 15-year-old is having biology this year. And so it's her first real immersion into evolution. And, evolution, when you study it, you get this kind of veneer of, well, it's survival of the fittest, or it's, the most adaptable, or, what have you. But when you really dig into what it means, and this is what we were talking about last night, the path to knowledge in natural systems is by failure of a whole bunch of things. And you as a person, or your community as a place, is actually the culmination of lots of hard-won insights that you might not even be aware of. They're just embedded inside you, or embedded inside your community, or what have you, that have been passed on to you. And so I always feel like there's a certain Doomer optimist like side to evolution, because on one hand, that's how things actually, evolve to work and change and be mind-blowingly incredible. I mean, just the environment that we live in, nature, us, our bodies, the way we process things, it's a beautiful thing. But you recognize that it also has been created for us using this mechanism that is very destructive and punishes things that don't work quite right.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have, as I said, we have many fans of you in our group, but also many fans of Nassim Taleb and sort of the Antifragile Mindset. We have folks that are complexity science experts and doctors like Joe Norman. And so we talk about this a lot, the need for, what break checks in society, small minor failures to make us more resilient. And in fact, your book talks a lot about that, and sort of in the spirit of avoiding big solutions to big problems, focus perhaps on small solutions to small problems. Like, can you give us your philosophy on that before we get into some other specifics?
Well, it very much is inspired by the Nassim Taleb, Karl Popper kind of school of insights, where, I think if we all sat down to design the perfect biological creature, we would design something that accomplished a lot of things poorly, or accomplished one thing very well, but wasn't adaptable, wasn't flexible, couldn't survive over time. I think, that insight that when we go out and we try to solve as humans the problem in front of us, be it traffic congestion, or be it how do we stay out of the Great Depression, or how do we provide a stable housing market, whatever that is, there's a recognition that whatever answer we come up with is going to come with its own kind of cascading impacts. I'm working on the next book right now, which is about housing. And a big part of the housing insight is that during the Great Depression, we stepped in to save the housing market by creating all these programs to keep housing prices from dropping. And then at the end of World War II, we realized that all these programs that kept houses from dropping also could help housing prices go up in a boom and help us build more housing and create more housing. It's like, this is great. Look at all this stuff. And now we find ourselves, in 2022 with a housing market that is absolutely broken, where people can't afford homes, where, the entire housing market is dominated by Wall Street, where you are a product, a mortgage buying a house, not a human trying to live in shelter. And you recognize that the path to get to those two started with this unnatural intervention in a complex adaptive system. And instead of allowing that system, making your intervention either short and allowing the system to kind of figure itself out, or, allowing the system just to kind of recreate itself in a more stable and productive way, we stepped in because we knew better. And now we've created what I think is a crash or a set of circumstances that in many ways dwarf the fragility that we experienced at the beginning of the Great Depression.
I totally agree, and that's still on the Doomer piece. Again, I think what gives us optimism is the failure of these systems are going to bring us, at the very least, more dependent on each other, closer together. We think that this will make us better neighbors, ultimately in the long run, more resilient locally. Can you give us a little picture of the optimism side from your perspective?
Well, there was a period of time, I remember in the early days of the blog. If you go back and read when it was a blog and not a full media site like we do now, you go back to 2008 and read those early pieces, and you'll see an engineer that was really angry, a planner, and you'll see a guy that was very upset. And I remember a lot of my visions being, like this big box store I helped get built. At some point in my lifetime is going to have a roof collapse and trees growing up in it and homeless people living in it. And it's going to be a really bad thing for everybody. What changed that for me was other people, and realizing that I had not only people in my life. I mean, I live in the same small town I grew up in. I'm very close to people here, but even beyond just the familiarity of it, recognizing that I could have these connections with my neighbors, with my church and my church community, with my family, with the shop owners and others here, and that those things would bring great value not only to my life today, but if I needed those connections in the future, that was actually a greater source of strength and resiliency than anything else I could do. I had a friend here once who said to me, his plan, he's like, I think the world's going to hell, and I think, I'm going to need a backup plan. And his backup plan was, I want to buy a cabin out in the woods and stock it with food and ammunition and what have you. And I'm like, dude, that is a terrible backup plan. Your backup plan is like, look around. That neighbor needs your help. That neighbor needs your help. That neighbor over there will help you. Get to know all these people. And it will not only help you in a time of need, but it will greatly enrich your life today. And so if you read Strong Towns today, you're going to find, especially, particularly in my writing, a lot of optimism and a lot of what I would just say joy, because we don't have to wait for things to go bad to find people that we love and care about around us and get a lot of value out of those relationships.
Absolutely. I would qualify a lot of, maybe not you specifically, but a lot of your readership as sort of, falling into the new urbanist camp. And a lot of us like to focus more on sort of the rural side of things. And this is maybe where I'll turn the table over to Kara a little bit. We want to sort of drill down into sort of a more rural small town aspect of Strong Towns. So Kara, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, your answer about community really resonates with me, that our safety lies in our engagement with other people. But thinking about that from a smaller community, in some ways, it's a lot easier to engage with a fewer number of neighbors than in a large city type of environment. And yet in your book, you talk a lot about creating productive places and delight per acre. And it seems a lot easier to create that kind of value per acre model in a more concentrated place. And I'm curious about how you see applying some of the strong towns concepts to making a more rural or spread out type of community a stronger town.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think that the way we should think about this is there's an encumbrance we have in that we live in this modern world, and we've grown used to kind of the way it operates. But I want to take us back a little bit. And I had the good fortune of, like I said, growing up on the original Marohn homestead family farm. So my great-great-grandparents homesteaded this place, and I grew up there. My parents still live there today. But when I was a kid, the road out in front of my parents' house was like 2 tire tracks through the woods. It was a city road, but it was the city road in name only, right? It was when it would snow here, and I'm in Minnesota for people who don't know, when it would snow here, and it snows in the winter, the snowplow would show up maybe the next day. Like it was not like they were out at 5 a.m., plowing your road. You might get out, you might not get out. You had to have food stored. You had to have backup plans. There was not the option of, if the barn burned down, or I remember my dad, and this may freak some people out, but it was very normal growing up. I remember we had a loaded shotgun behind the door, because quite frankly, sometimes people would come to our house in the middle of the night there for whatever reason, their car would break down, and it happened a number of times as a kid. And you were half an hour, 45 minutes away from a sheriff showing up if you called. So that was like the environment there. I live in town right now. I live in the same, the adjacent city that the farm is 3 miles from my house, but I live in town, and that was where my grandma lived, and some other people in my family lived. We've got a full like paved street and sewer and water and all the infrastructure and what have you. I feel like those two ends of the spectrum, urban neighborhoods, which, my urban neighborhood is a small town urban neighborhood, but you could pick it up and bring it into a big city and drop it into even parts of New York City, and it wouldn't be that out of context. It's an urban gridded neighborhood with a park in the middle and all that. Those two kind of ends of the spectrum lend themselves really well to kind of independence, a certain level of resiliency, a certain level of connectedness, because in town, you've got enough, you're dependent on the public infrastructure. You're dependent on someone keeping the sewer line running and keeping the water system running and keeping the roads. But you also have like a lot of people around who can pay taxes or who can step up and do those things. There's a lot of capacity there to actually deliver on that. In the rural setting, we didn't have any of that stuff. Like all that was out there. But we all knew our neighbors. When it was time to hay, you would go help your neighbor. They would come over and help you. If it was going to rain and you had to get stuff in real quick, people would run over. There'd be 20 people in our fields, like bringing stuff in. We were very close and connected because we needed that connection, but it wasn't a connection that ran through government and like official systems. I think that the more we can put ourselves in one of those two frameworks, where we're either committing to, in a sense, a local community framework. And if we want to call that local government, I actually think that's the easiest way for us to organize. But, whether it's a block level or a homeowners association or a neighborhood association or whatever it is, when we organize together to kind of maintain stuff, it works really well. And if we commit to like a very rural setting where we don't have a lot of those physical mutual obligations, but we may have some cultural ones that help us make things work. I think those things can work as well. It's when we're in the middle, when we don't want the social connections with the people around us, we want to pay our taxes and we want all the services delivered as if it's magic. Those are the places to me that are the most fragile, because they're the most dependent on everybody else delivering something for you that you are, in a sense, unwilling to roll up your sleeves and be part of doing yourself. And I think those are the places that if I lived in, I would try to move, or I would try to create that deeper social network amongst the people around me.
I think you've hit on a really interesting challenge, and one that resonates with me. I live in a place that was formerly rural. We live in an old house on 5 acres in what was part once of a 65-acre dairy farm. The other 60 acres are now a cul-de-sac. The farm across the street has been turned into a suburb. How, I think you've started to answer it, but I'd love to hear you elaborate a little more. How do you how do you bring that community about? How do you make that kind of place stronger?
Yeah. It's very hard. It's very hard. And I say that because, there's a couple of different aspects at work here. The first aspect is the physical part of this. I mean, when you build a subdivision of 5-acre lots, I've done the math on these in different contexts around the country, and the tax revenue generated by this style of development doesn't even maintain the roadway required to get to that development, let alone, all the other services that people would come to expect living in that, what I would say is like a mid-intensity kind of way. You have this fundamental insolvency. And when you build it initially, it works because those costs are rolled into a mortgage, they're rolled into a long-term financing. But when you actually have to come together collectively, and this is generally through local government, to fix and maintain this stuff, you find that there's not enough money there. And people are actually not willing to pay the thousands of dollars extra a year that it would take to make good on all these things. And so the social contract, which is laundered through this third party, the local government, starts to break down. You demand more services than you're willing to pay for. You allow the local government to take on debt to make good on these services. That only makes the future problem worse. There becomes a very, individually centric kind of focused approach that says, I want the maximum amount of stuff for the cheapest amount possible. And this system will deliver it for a short period of time and then stop. So there's that underlying like physical tension. There's also the cultural tension in the idea that, if you have if you're surrounded with 5-acre lots, the marketing brochure for that style of living focuses on isolation, right? Like we actually, as someone who grew up on a 80-acre farm, who did not feel like I knew I was a rural compared to my grandma and what have you, but I wasn't like rural in terms of like Montana, I didn't have like 1,000 acres and we were going to have to travel 45 minutes to get to civilization. The marketing brochure, when they split up the land around my parents and built a school across the street, was, this is country living. And I thought that like that, I didn't even have country living. You certainly don't have country living in 5 acres. What you have is social isolation. Your neighbors are far enough away where they won't get up in your business, where you can go outside and yes, you're going to hear the highway, you're going to hear this, but you might also see a deer go through your backyard. You might have a simulacrum of nature going on. That's the marketing brochure. And when that is the thing that you bought into, it's really, really hard. I have found it's really difficult to go to those places and say, okay, we're going to have a block party and everyone's going to get together. They'll be, okay, I might do that. Yeah, we're going to actually like get together and chat about like, how do we get up in each other's business in the sense that how do we get to know each other better and help each other? And it's like, yeah, I didn't sign up for that. I signed up to wave when I drive by you on the cul-de-sac and I'll be friendly in that way. But I don't want to, I don't want to have to worry about, are you going to come over and help me shovel my sidewalk? Am I going to come help you, mow your yard? Are we going to help each other if the power goes out? some of those human instincts might kick in, but the marketing brochure of those places is the antithesis of that. It is selling them social isolation.
It's funny that I'm hearing a lot of tangents to a book that I'm reading right now, and maybe you're familiar with Murray Bookchin, but there's a book called The Rise in Urbanization and the Decline of Citizenship. And really you've touched on like so many points that he makes, like what used to be a sort of a civic culture and an interdependence between, the rural areas surrounding a more urban community and the urban community itself has all vanished. And it's all vanished because people, for whatever reason, you can suspect why, but because people live their lives by proxy far more than they have before, and they are not civically engaged, and they are not at least of the realization that they're interdependent with their more rural areas. And I think, what we need is to reestablish those connections between town and country, between citizen and citizenship and civic duty. From what I understand with your work, you seem to be all about that. Where I wanted to go sort of next, and it's along those same lines. Right now, especially in light of COVID and other recent events, we have a sort of a repopulation of certainly rural areas, and certainly sort of rural small towns. I think we are from New England, so I think of places like Brattleboro, Vermont, like Peterborough, New Hampshire, like Greenville, Massachusetts. Over the past 2 years, people have been flooding into those places, and in my opinion, those places have great bones, right? The tremendous opportunity for more resilient, more human-scaled, more connected lifestyles. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on, do you agree with that? Is that a good thing? And it can't only, and if you do, it can't only be a good thing. There are some negatives that I see, and that's the possibility of gentrification, both in the economic sense and in the cultural sense. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what COVID has done to at least more rural, strong towns, and what are the pluses and minuses to that?
Yeah, it's been astounding to watch the population shifts. And now we're actually getting the data about how many people San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York lost. And it's tragic in some ways. I have a lot of friends who in the early days of the pandemic denied that this was happening, say, this isn't happening, this isn't going on. Or if it is, it's a good thing. We need some more turnover here. But you're talking, unprecedented levels of population shift. For small towns, I have chosen to live in a small town. I can make the case that is an optimum way to live for many reasons. I don't think I'm going to make that case, because I respect the fact that a lot of other people would choose different things. But this migration that we've seen now in response to COVID, where cities have, the bargain you make in a very urban area like a New York City is that I'm going to give up a lot of the personal space, the privacy. I'm going to give up a lot of the charm of being. I know people who know their neighbors, but you're much more anonymous in a big city than you are in a small town. I'm going to give up some of that in order to experience better restaurants and nicer amenities and theater and all the things that cities bring. This is a very 21st century mindset, by the way. If we went back 100 years, the trade-off as a city was I could get a job. There's some of that going on today. But there's really I'm choosing the city lifestyle as a lifestyle and as an amenity. Well, take that away, lock people in their homes, and then all of a sudden it's like, why am I here? I can get in a cheaper place that would have far more room and actually be in a city that still offers some amenities, because a lot of the rural places and small towns weren't as locked down as the big cities. And so to me, it was a very logical and natural thing that a big shift in population would happen. When you look at what this did to small cities, though, Part of it was a real needed, positive breath of fresh air almost. These are places that were hurting too. And all of a sudden our restaurants were going out of business, but all these, people from in Minnesota here, from the Twin Cities, from Minneapolis and St. Paul, moving up here and living here, used to eating out at restaurants, and maybe at times that our culture up here is a little bit more frugal. They're going out to eat and they're propping up these places and they're keeping it going. And that, those dollars in this market really helped. And I think people saw it as, a real positive. But now what you see as things have gone on and as things have lingered, this overall inflationary environment that we're in, the front edge sword of that has always been the housing market. The housing market has always been the thing at the leading edge that has driven the underlying economic. I mean, Ben Bernanke said in 2007, I think, or 2008, the U.S. economy is the housing market. And we have had we had a massive housing bubble in 2008. Housing prices, even, in the bottoms of the COVID pandemic, were many multiples higher than that bubble in terms of price to earnings ratio. And so we are in an unprecedented level of housing price expansion, completely unmoored from what people are actually capable of paying. That effect has been felt most acutely over the last decade in urban areas. And now it is being felt in an even greater degree in small towns. My little house, I say little house, I live in a former almost mansion. It was built in 1914. It's like 3,200 square feet. I live 2 hours from the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport. I think I live in the lap of luxury. I paid $220,000 for my house. Zillow has it worth almost $400,000 today, and that's 5 years later. And so what you see is that if you were living in a small town in a $60,000 house or an $80,000 house, working at a very low paying job, but making things go, you could have a really good lifestyle that was very low burn. What has happened now is that you cannot have a low burn lifestyle in a small town starting out today. If you were here before and you were established and you've got you're set at like a lower burn rate, you can maybe continue that, especially if you don't have to get in your car and drive places, if you can walk or bike to the grocery store and what have you. But if you're moving here now today, you may say, well, great. Housing is half the cost of what it is in a major metro area. That's great. I can pay that. I can afford that. Yeah, but the jobs pay also half as much. And the whole thing is kind of shifting in that way. And if you're just starting out at the bottom end of the thing, trying to work your way up, the promise that small towns used to deliver has, if it's not evaporated, it's coming under serious threat because of those financial flows here and the way that inflation has shown up and wreaked huge havoc in these markets. And, the more people who work remotely, I mean, I have a remote job, but I started the nonprofit that way. I've kind of built it. We were Zooming and doing remote work before remote work was cool. But I look at all the people doing it today, and you can make Twin Cities wages in some ways and live up here in my small town. And that just means that the market for everything price-wise is being distorted by these huge capital flows that have not existed here ever.
I totally agree with you. And how, I think on the one end, capital flows, let's say you work remotely for a big corporation, you have income from this corporation that you can then spend locally in this new rural small town that you live in. And while that might seem like a good thing, the ultimate is to make income in a rural small town and spend your earnings in a rural small town. Like how can we connect the dots? Like, how can we capture some of this energy? People who have found a new place, it's a beautiful place, perhaps, in theory, more resilient. How can we make it actually more resilient? How can we sort of root those folks?
Yeah, this is where the doomer part of me starts to take over, because I think the most fragile breaking point right now today. The thing that breaks, that cascades breaking everywhere, is the macroeconomy. We have, for reasons that I believe are understandable, the idea that we needed to stay out of the Great Depression, that we could create a lot of growth and prosperity for people by juicing the economy. It's created this ridiculously fragile system. I'm 48 years old. I remember in 2008 when, the Treasury Secretary was kneeling in front of the Speaker of the House saying, if you don't give us $1 trillion in the next 24 hours, there won't be groceries on the shelf in 3 days. Okay, ponder that for a second. I don't think that was hyperbole, right? But let's say that it was a little bit of hyperbole. If that is one possible outcome of our financial system, that is a scary outcome. Like, that should never be, like, mass starvation of Americans should never be like one possible outcome of many outcomes in our system. That should be not a possibility, but it's a very real possibility in our system today. And because of that, you see all these crazy things where every time the economy starts to hiccup, because it's really, really screwed up. I mean, we have massive disparities in earnings. We have massive disparities in wealth. We have systems that are not responding to real conditions on the ground. Every time it starts to hiccup, our response is to pump more money into it, basically to push it up even more. And there's one way that ends. I mean, that can only go on so long until it breaks. And when it breaks, what comes next? What is the way that manifests? Right now, the pressure is inflation. The pressure is that we can't afford things. And whether it's groceries we can't afford or whether it's housing we can't afford, what we see is that people are being pushed beyond their capacities right now. I think that, we have to come up with economic tools where instead of having a national economy that trickles down or tries to trickle down prosperity to local economies, whether through that trickle down is through the capitalist system or whether that trickle down is through the government system. I don't care what your method of like redistributing top down gains are. It's the theory is that we'll have success here and then that will get pushed down to the bottom. We actually have to have regional economies that are successful. And those regional economies be almost like semi-autonomous economies, not vastly connected, where, I'm competing to buy the house across the street from me from some person in Wall Street who just has a hedge fund who's just buying up properties. That's not a housing market. A housing market is a market that responds to local conditions. For many, many years, we had Amazon, right? And we have Amazon today, but I remember in the early years of Amazon, the joke was, thanks to all the Wall Street hedge funds that are, subsidizing my delivery, because Amazon lost money for the first 18 years of its existence. But their plan was always what? It was to drive everybody else out of business and then make all the money. And we're kind of like, the pandemic kind of pushed us into that point now, right? This is not a system that is responsive to what people can afford. It's not a market system in the sense that price signals are giving people the incentive to go out and either create or stop creating. That whole feedback loop is broken. And it's broken because the distance between the consumer, the person who's making the purchases, the person who's discerning what to spend their money on, and the place where the pricing decisions and the economic decisions of how this thing is going to be delivered are being made, that distance is so great that there's no real feedback loop there. I'm a capitalist, but I'm a localist more than I'm a capitalist. And I think that markets, I think you can't read Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations without reading Adam Smith's Theory of Moral Sentiments and recognizing that everything that he overlaid in his economic insights were based on a foundation of moral insights, and all of us, working together in a community, in a place, I think divorce from that, it just stops working. It doesn't work. The whole Gordon Gekko, like greed is good notion at a local level, it is not the benevolence of the butcher and the baker and, others that provides you your meal. It's them looking out for themselves and their own interests. But you can't divorce the proximity of people to each other and the human overlay of that. The fact that if I go to you, the butcher, and buy something and it's bad, not only am I going to give you the feedback that this is an inferior product, but you also go to the same church that I do. Kids go to the same school as I do. We're on the same PTA board. I'm going to see you walking down the street. I go to McDonald's and I don't like the delivery the franchise is giving me. It's making me fat. It's making me sick. It's giving me diabetes and heart disease. Who do I complain to about that? Some faceless corporation, somewhere away. It doesn't work. And so I think what we've done in the trap we've gotten ourselves into about needing to grow the economy every quarter at exponential rates is that we've been willing to sacrifice the strength and resiliency of our economy. And we've made our economy ridiculously fragile.
Yeah, you're hitting all the chords. I think Kara would agree of some of the gripes that we have. We touched a lot upon the economic elements of it, but there's also a cultural element as well, and a quick storytelling. So you and I are very similar in that I grew up on a dairy farm, third generation dairy farm in rural New England, and I now live in a fairly major New England city, so there's a cultural element there, and I think that there is a societal pressure that is sucking our young people out of smaller rural strong towns. It happened to me, maybe it happened to you. I'm projecting a little bit, but and I had this related tweet, frankly inspired by some of Wendell Berry's writing, so I'm a huge fan of, and it's, the hypermobility of people is the hypermorbidity of place. And I feel really strongly because, when I go back to the place that I come from, there's no young people. They're all gone. And anybody who might have the social human capital to invest in these smaller towns, the youth that requires that, they're gone. They got sucked into the cities and into an economic engine, but also into a cultural engine. So, my question to you, and to use some of your language, how do we get those folks to value strengthening their place versus going places? Like, how do we change that narrative? How do we keep those folks interested in rootedness versus mobility, both culturally or social mobility and economic mobility?
Yeah. You're asking a really tough question too, because I have a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old. And if you talk to them, they both will tell you, I can't wait to leave town. When I graduate, I'm out of here. Like, I'm going, the one wants to go to Berkeley. The other one wants to go to Hawaii. Who knows where they will settle, right? Their kids, they're trying to figure it out, but their aspirations is to get out. And I get that. And here's the reality is that for my wife and I, we want them to leave. There isn't a 4-year university here. There isn't a path here in this city for them to get the type of education that I think they need, and I think they'll benefit from. But the reality is, and I'll say this, I'm a dad, so I'm proud of my kids, but my kids are like exceptionally smart. They're very gifted kids. They should go to college. I think that what we have done is we've systematically strip mined our small towns, the intellectual capital of our small towns. And what has happened is the machine of, and you could call it the urbanization machine or the machine of the big cities. They need people to work at, the insurance company, and they need people to work at the schools, and they need people to work at the banks, and they need people to do all this stuff. And we've created a system. And when I hear people talk about, free college education, and I'm hearing, we're coming for all of your kids, like every one of them that could work on Wall Street we are going to come to them with the path to get them there and the incentive package to keep them there, no matter if it grinds down their spirit, no matter if it disconnects them from place and people, and that we're going to make that the default option, and we're going to kind of surround it with a cultural narrative that says this is what success and prosperity looks like. I don't have a real good antidote for that beyond, and this is going to sound completely not up to the challenge, but I'm maybe not up to the challenge of this. This is maybe beyond what my calling is to do. But I feel like with my kids, what I've tried to do is show them a lot of love. I've tried to have them experience the love and the connection of the city and to value the things that are here. Of course, they have grandparents here, they have family here. But we try to go to like the football games at the school, and we try to, participate in things at the church. And we try to, when they're having the street festival downtown, go down and be part of that. And have them be actively involved in the community, because at some point in their life, this is my thinking anyway, they will reach a crossroads where they have to make a decision. Do I go down this path here? And let's personify it a little bit, perhaps unfairly. Do I go down this path here that maybe will bring me greater riches or greater acclamation in terms of what the TV and the movies and culture, TikTok are telling me is like great, but feels a little soulless and feels a little not like me? Or do I go down this route here, which is a little more humble, a little more service oriented, a little bit more, maybe less glamorous, but feels like the place that I will be fully who I am? And I hope that I've equipped them as a parent with the ability to make that choice when it comes to them, and to be happy with that. That seems completely not up to the task, the broad task that, we're trying to do this at a community level. But as a parent, that's been my only response to this challenge. It would mean a lot to me if, when I reach the age of my life where I need help from, day to day, because I'm a young guy now. I walk everywhere. I'm very healthy. But when I reach a point where, like where I see my parents at right now, where they do need help shoveling their sidewalks, and they do need help day to day with things. And I hope that my progeny is around,
Sure.
interested in doing that with me.
Sure.
And I hope that they are confident that someday their progeny will be around, interested in being part of their lives in that way too. But who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe it will just be maybe it'll just be robots, changing my bedpan.
Let's hope not. Let's hope not.
Let's hope not.
We only have a few minutes left. Kara, I wanted to turn the floor over to you. I've been taking up a lot of the air in the room, so I apologize for that.
Really, this is a very interesting conversation. And I think maybe I'll respond to Chuck's last statement by saying our communities are made up of our individual choices. Our lives are made up of our individual choices. And sometimes it feels like there are large forces that we're all responding to, but all we can do is act within our own communities. And I think it's beautiful. You're trying to show your children the love of place and the love of family. And I wish you the best of luck with that.
Thank you.
But
I was going to say, I agree with you. It is all a culmination. Let me put it this way. There's so many people trying to change our culture from the top down, right? Whether it's like CRT or don't say gay or like whatever your like agenda is, there's big left and right, blue and red agendas to change culture. It's all a culmination of people's hearts. Like, I think that's the one thing that can't be changed, right? Is like, you can say the economy is a macro collection of macro capital flows, but our culture is not going to be a macro collection of cultural top-down flow. It's always going to be the culmination of, in our case of the US, 320 million hearts. There's no other way that it can be done, right?
So personally, more and more in my life, I'm trying to actively choose community, actively choose beauty and friendship over, as you say, status and other aspects that often get culturally reinforced. But I did just want to give you a chance to let people know where they can find out more about Strong Towns as an organization, more about your ideas. Where should people look if they want to go deeper with some of your ideas?
Thank you. I appreciate that, because Strong Towns started as this blog, this like voice in the wilderness kind of saying, am I crazy? Today, we have a full media site. Our strategy is to build a movement of people who want to see things differently. And so at strongtowns.org, we publish 3 articles a day, every weekday. We have 3 different podcast streams we do. We're on every major social media platform. So if you're on Instagram, if you're on Facebook or Twitter, or we're venturing into TikTok, it was just kind of crazy for me. But if you're in any of these spaces, just search for Strong Towns. We're there, and we're communicating and having two-way conversations with people. And if you get plugged into those spaces, I think you're going to find almost an infinite amount of depth that you can go. We not only have 12 years or 14 years now of me writing regularly, but a whole bunch of other voices now that are approaching this with different backgrounds and different understandings and different knowledge, but trying to apply these same things in ways that I have learned a lot from and found very beautiful. You two are members. Members is, we're a nonprofit. So membership is 40% of our entire budget. People giving us a little bit here and a little bit there, and it adds up, and it's formed a beautiful community of people who are out doing, and I think supporting others doing great bottom-up work. So please, I encourage anybody who's interested to plug into the degree that your interest pushes you at strongtowns.org.
Great. No, we're like I said at the start, we're huge fans. We're tremendously happy to have you on. If I could make a couple plugs, your book, Strong Towns, is fantastic. It's very fundamental, very, very easy to read, straightforward. You break down the economics of the situation very well. And my personal favorite blog post is the micro neighborliness. I guess micro neighborliness, a celebration of the small, and just the concept of micro neighborliness. I think it hits right to what we're talking about at the trail end here. It's all about the small things that you can do in your community first to make things just a little bit stronger. So that's my closing thought. I wanted to turn the table over for you for a parting thought. And as I prepped you for, it's a little bit of a running joke of the show to have our editors cut you off in your most sentient point at the end. So it just keeps people hanging, and it's a little bit of fun. So keep it juicy, I guess, if you will. But thank you, Chuck. So turn the table over to you.
Thank you. I always, the words came out of my mouth one day: keep doing what you can to build a strong town. And that was really the kind of catalyst moment for me. And we use that all the time on all the stuff we do, is that none of us are being called to save the world. None of us are being called to, reinvent everything. We're just called to do the humble little thing that we're capable of doing. And my gosh, if we all did that, the world would transform. The world would be an amazing place. The world would be great. And here's the thing, it's within all of our capacities to do it. So keep doing what you can to build a strong town.
Amen. Amen. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chuck. We look forward to hopefully engaging with you more on the platform, and wish you the best of luck. Thank you so much for joining us.
I would love that, and appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Kara.
Thanks so much, Chuck.